Hi, my name is Cosima. I'm from FlippGen, and welcome to the Flip the Script podcast. Today's episode is a collaboration between FlippGen and Girlguides, featuring Yazz and Kashuf, who are advocates at Girlguiding, alongside Delnaz and myself from FlippGen. Today's conversation is about what it's really like growing up online and what that looks like along gender lines. We at FlipGen are all about no tech with a K, not no tech. And so we'll be touching on the good, the tough, and the hidden parts of the youth digital experience. To start us off, I'm going to go around and ask everyone to introduce themselves. Please could you give me your name and one word to describe your relationship between the digital world and technology? Should we start with Delnaz?
Hi, my name is Delnaz Kazemi, and I'm here with FlippGen today. And that's so tough. I'd say in more recent times it would be balanced, but it definitely wasn't like that throughout my childhood. But I've reached that point now.
Cool. And Kashuf?
Hi, I'm Kashuf. I'm one of the girl guiding advocates. And one word to describe my relationship with the digital world would be fun. I find digital things, I mean, tech, I think it's a source of fun, source of joy, source of just like having a good time, I think.
Yaz?
Hi, yeah, I'm Yaz. I'm very excited to be on today's podcast. I think one word that I'd use to describe my kind of relationship or young women and girls' relationships with social media is definitely very chaotic. It's brilliant at times, but sometimes there's definitely some information on there that's either incorrect or perhaps not what you'd want young girls to see. So definitely a bit confusing, a bit chaotic.
Amazing. I think, yeah, everyone's relationships with technology varies so much. I think for me, sometimes it can be so inspiring to see other people aspiring for different things that I'm interested in. But then at the same time, it can be a little stressful to try and compare yourself to all these other people and everything amazing that they're doing, because I feel like that's not necessarily the picture of what everything is all the time, but neither is the real world. I don't know. It's difficult, but it can also be exactly such a place of fun. So thank you everyone for that. Now we're going to start off with a few questions about sort of how you grew up online. So what do you wish adults understood about growing up in the digital world today? Should we start maybe with Yas?
Of course. Honestly, I think there's so much that social media brings, and I think it's hard for adults who haven't necessarily grown up with social media to know how to kind of approach the issues that come with it, but also the benefits that come with social media and the internet as a whole. Personally, I've grown up being on social media since I was 13. I did have to wait until I was 13 the age requirements and things like that. But then after that, I've definitely found some really positive things out of using social media. I've connected with so many people in the social action space, so many people across girl guiding, and you can make such good friends and relationships and maintain them through social media and being able to stay in contact with people. But then obviously there's the issues of different misinformation that you may find online and all sorts of perhaps fake content, especially with AI and things like that now. So it's definitely issues on there that harm young people and young girls that we definitely
For
need to look
sure.
out for.
Thank you so much. And Delnaz, what do you wish that sort of adults understood about growing up in the digital world today as it stands?
Yeah, I think now compared to before, adults see the positive side more than they used to, which is great. Because the new adults now also grew up with social media and different types of technology. The one thing I wish I understood now is that a lot of young people are aware of the harms that we are discussing. They may just not know how to navigate it yet. So sometimes extra support is all that's needed on an individual case by case level anyway.
Thank you so much. And Kashif, do you have any thoughts on what you wish adults knew about what it's like to sort of grow up online?
I think Delnaz's point is perfect. That is one of the two things I was going to say is that I think a lot of young people, especially obviously the ones who sort of our age who've grown up with social media, really understand. We do know what the sort of dangers are really, but it's a case of maybe not knowing how to navigate certain situations or not knowing what the best sort of course of action is. Because it's the whole thing of that anything you post online, anything you do online is obviously permanent. Your digital footprint is there from day one all the way through. I think another thing is that social media has really evolved into being like not a replacement, but almost like another substitute for like entertainment and like visual entertainment. Obviously, we had like TV and film. We still do have those things, but they're really not as common as you think. Like, not many people have sort of cable TV or maybe a satellite in their house. And social media, in a way, is just sort of sharing the video content or just like media content through like such an like easier way, such a more accessible way. Social media isn't just Instagram or just Facebook. It's also just like YouTube videos, or it's like, WhatsApp messages. It's so varied and so different in every way. And I think it's a part of society, part of everyone through and through. So banning social media or pausing it completely is like impossible almost. Like, it's in everyone's life so much that you have to sort of accept it being a thing and sort of navigate it with its challenges, but also it brings, as Yaz said, so many positives, I think.
Yeah, you guys have such brilliant takes. I think that idea that sort of the digital world is like so diverse and also so heavily integrated into our lives, making it like such a complex, like not necessarily problem, but just like such a complex challenge to like contend with if we're like looking at how to like make those harms like less. It's like towing the line between the instinct of wanting to just turn everything off that is scary, but then understanding that like perhaps like we don't turn off the real world when it's scary, we like make it safer like internally, and we put in laws and things like that. I think is really interesting and definitely something very current at the moment. And what do you guys wish you had known when you had got a phone? Delnaz, what do you think?
I got a phone when I was 8, which is very, or no, 7 actually, which is very young. And this was in 2012. So it was a different time. And I don't think the algorithms were as advanced. But as I grew up and those advanced addictive algorithms did start coming into play, I wish I knew how that worked because, until a few years ago, whenever I started researching about this, I didn't realize how they were structured or why I was so drawn to this. And those who may not have that knowledge, like I didn't back then, may just think, okay, well, the content's entertaining, so I'm scrolling, but why am I on this for hours and hours and hours? So understanding how the design actually works, I think is really important. And now that I have that awareness, I find it easier to regulate my social media use and just general phone use.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think the idea of like having information and that giving you like autonomy and agency is like really important and like something that's maybe overlooked a little bit of the time. I think sometimes like the digital world can be a bit of a minefield and it can then be really scary and that can cause panic, which it can be very, very valid. But like once we can give people that information and they can make those choices and understand what they're operating on, then I think that probably puts us in like a much better place. And there's some like things we can all do on our own part, and there's things that like different actors have like a job to make that information like accessible. But yet I think that's a really like under discussed point. Okay, the next question I'd like to look at is, do you guys think that the experiences young people face growing up online are impacted by like their gender identity? Maybe should we start with Kashuf?
Sure. One good question. I think so. I was having a bit of a think about this, and I was thinking, when did I notice that like there was a like disconnect between girls and boys, for example, on social media? And I don't think I noticed it until very recently. And I think that's because so much of social media is just amplified of what we have like in the real world. So we do have obviously all these like constructs and all these norms and all these sorts of expectations for example, for girls and boys. Girls should be this, that, and the other. You should look a certain way, you should be a certain way, you should act a certain way. Boys should do the same thing. But I don't think that's necessarily just a social media thing. It's also obviously in the real world. Like, we've grown up and in history, obviously, we've evolved and gotten better. But through the years, boys and girls are told to be a certain way, look a certain way. And I think that same rhetoric is just only amplified on social media. So I don't think it's a case of like there's a disconnect between girls and boys, for example, on social media. I think it's more a case of that in our real world, there is still this disconnect. And that's just the same thing that we hear on social media. So step one to the issue isn't going, social media, stop saying these things. Step one is going back to the root cause of the problem and actually figuring out why we think these certain ways and maybe like breaking, which I know is like wishful thinking and this could take years and years and years of work and hope, is breaking down those barriers and saying that why do we think this and why do we do this in the real world? For example, you go to a girl and you go, oh, you look this way, why do you do that? Why are we saying that in person? and then that's the thing that we were
Yeah.
putting onto the actual social media. So it's not a case of social media is the bad hit. It's a case of that what we think originally is the thing we need to fix, I guess.
Yeah, and I think honestly, it's not wishful thinking. It might be a challenge, but I think that like long-termism of like thinking about like what are the issues we're actually facing? Like why are they happening? Where is it happening? Is something that like doesn't always happen because we see, I think, especially on social media, like we see all of this content and it makes things feel really scary. And then we think, like you said, it's just online. But then in the real world, we experience misogyny and like homophobia and everything else too. And it's maybe like it feels more intense because we're constantly on our phones seeing it. But if we spent that time in the real world, we would probably experience the same
Exactly.
things,
Yeah.
just maybe on like a more micro scale. And so yeah, thinking about how we can actually target these issues in the real world and then like that manifest online, I think is something that is really important to think about. So thank you so much. Yaz, do you have any thoughts on that?
Definitely. I mean, I completely second everything you said there, Kashuf. I think it's really important to think about how social media is kind of the mirror of what you experience in real life. But also, I think it's kind of thinking about like the gender divide. I think it's kind of traditional for more boys to play like video games and things like that. So, kind of looking at other internet uses, you kind of see boys playing like football video games and things like that. And it's kind of, it used to be seen as unusual for girls to play video games. And I think it's important to kind of bring the divide to a close because it's not unusual for girls to play video games and things like that. Because like in our real life, we saw how back hundreds of years ago and even till like recent days, there's obviously that gender divide within roles in the home and things like that, with the men typically being the breadwinner and then women kind of being like that kind of caring, nurturing role. And that's kind of mirrored in social media within, or just in internet use in general. But I think if we're talking more specifically about social media, again, I haven't noticed a huge gender divide until recently. I think when you really start to kind of think about how our boys and girls, like young boys and girls and young people in general, using the social media and what's actually the effect of that, and how are they bringing that kind of the things they've learned off social media into their real life, and then vice versa.
Really interesting. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, I think when we think about like the digital world, we like immediately run to think about social media because it is probably like the most universal digital experience. But like online gaming is a massive thing. And like depending on who you are, you might do that even more. And like those like gender roles and gender divides, I think from like the limited experience I have had with like online gaming are very much also prevalent in those spaces. And it's like we don't want to forget about the platforms that maybe aren't at like the forefront of our minds. Okay, how do you think maybe like gender can influence the different types of harm that young people experience like in the digital world, or maybe like as they move from like being a young person to like going towards adulthood? Like how do you think maybe those experiences differ, or maybe like the kind of issues we talked about, like misogyny, manosphere content, like these kinds of things, um, impact young people growing up and like the harms that they face?
I took some notes as I was thinking from the last question, and I want to start off by saying that boys and men can also experience the things that I'm going to say, but I try not to look at comments anymore, but when I do, or when I did, there are a few themes that I always see, like hateful comments under posts that women and girls make, and a lot of it is about appearance, which again, I've seen it under boys' posts as well, and it's, equally as harmful, but I find that it's almost very easy for these users with no profile picture, whatever it may be, to just say the worst things about someone's appearance. And, you know, I guess if someone on the street calls me a name, it's not going to bother me. But if you're a young girl and you're trying to like post content, express yourself, and you're getting hundreds of these comments, it can really be damaging. And then another thing I've seen, which you may have touched on, Cosima, is the kind of traditional roles almost being imposed on women and girls who are doing something different, and not actually imposed, like they're not forcing them to do it. But for example, if someone posts a video of themselves working out or something, it's very common to have comments under there being like, you shouldn't be doing that, you should be in the kitchen, for example. And it's ridiculous. Like, I don't think anyone will see that and take that person seriously, but it's the repetitiveness of these
Yeah, yeah,
types of
yeah.
comments and these themes that can really get to someone and harm them. And they can be a bit more unique to women and girls online these days.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think the idea of like these norms and standards being pushed upon young people is something so important to think about when we're looking at like the harms people experience and like how that might impact like their development. Because I think, especially you guys mentioned, like maybe in the past year or so, like you've seen these gender divides a little bit more. And I think something that I've really experienced is like this massive increase in like misogynistic content and incel content and manosphere content, like pushing these incredibly unachievable standards onto young people and everyone, but especially young people who are growing up. And like how that can manifest is obviously these like insane body standards or standards for like the way you live your life, which are then being like constantly commented onto people's posts. Or even if you're just a consumer of content, you're constantly seeing like women's bodies being like horrifically criticized along these logical like lines that we would see with like misogyny and everything else, like the fact that you have to, everyone is on Ozempic, and the fact that that's being pushed to young people as like the thing you have to do, I think is at least for me really scary. And yeah, I think that like that connection between like changing norms and social norms, how that gets like pushed onto social media, and then how that can generate harm for all young people, kind of regardless of your gender, but there are those like gendered lines. Um, I think is really interesting. I'm wondering if, Yaz, if you have anything to add on how maybe um like gender can influence the different types of harm that young people come across in the digital world.
I definitely do think gender has an impact on it, but I think it's also important to kind of note that people can't necessarily control what comes up on their feeds, like their social media scrolling. If they're scrolling on social media, for example, TikTok, they don't necessarily know what's coming up. There is obviously an algorithm, and when you search up certain content and things like that, then that tends to appear more. And if someone was to kind of be on the side of TikTok or Instagram or whatever it may be, that then comes up with more violent imaging, then that obviously is a problem. And I think girls can definitely experience that and can also interpret um, images and posts that may not have meant to be negative in a more negative way. And also men as well. But I do think kind of talking about the kind of ideal standards that women and young girls are supposed to reach with like the beauty standards and things like that, I do think that tends to kind of fall into girls slightly more. And I think it's also kind of noting that because people can't control what comes up on their feed. So in our Girl Guiding research, Girl Guiding as a company released last week, nearly a quarter, so about 24% of people don't feel in control of young people don't feel in control of in what appears on their social media feeds, and I think that's quite an important statistic. So that's nearly a quarter of all young people that we obviously interviewed and got the research from. So that's quite a huge chunk to kind of see perhaps the harm isn't coming from us directly, but from what social media platforms and organizations actually want us to see, which obviously isn't great if that's harming us as young people and young girls.
Thank you so much. That's so interesting. Like those figures are, I think, really, really poignant. Okay. Our next question is, what spaces online do you actually feel to be like empowering environments? Um, in kind of any respect. Like, are there spaces online, be that gaming, social media, forums, educational spaces, etc., where you feel like empowered as a young person, or as a girl, or as a, more broadly speaking? Um, yeah. Should we go to Kashif?
Yeah, so this is, I think, really evolved as like obviously I've gone older because I have, for example, really grown up with social media. I got a phone when I was like 13, 14. My parents were really strict on this. They're like, you can't have a phone when you're younger because of all the consequences, which is fair enough. But I had a tablet, and the first thing I remember is watching gaming YouTubers my favorite, oh, can't remember the name of my favorite one, but I used to sit for hours with my little brother, and that was how we connected. We'd watch these gaming YouTubers together, and we'd like geek out over them, because I used to love video games. I still kind of do. And we just like, it would be the best time. And that was like a safe space and empowering in a way, because it's like we were connecting and watching this really cool person and like enjoying their content. And all the comments used to be like really wholesome, be like, oh, you know, love this bit of the game, I love that bit of the game. So I remember that being like my first experience of being like, you know what, guys, this is so cool. And then obviously I went to school and I found out that boys were mean. They were like, you can't watch games. And I was like, what? The online person on the game says that I can. So like, what are you going to say about that? So I guess that's my first one. And then I think nowadays it's a lot of sort of like, I love cooking, I love baking. There's a lot of like good pages on that. And I also love creative writing and fan fiction pages. Like, though they may be some people like, oh, whatever, this, that, and that, I think it's really fun. I think there's a series that you're such a big fan of, you can take those characters and write, you know, a funny story, a silly story. And oftentimes forums and pages where people are sort of like, is again sharing hobbies, sharing, being social with media. It's like you're breaking down the words, but it's just like a place to connect, talking about videos, photos, writing, like any sort of like media content, and just like delving down and like discussing and being like, oh, I love this bit of your writing, I love that bit of your writing. Again, talking about things like that. And then I think one of the other side of it is sort of like advocating, like learning about different cultures and experiences. So I found a lot of like good mental health support, or really good like talks about like, again, because there's a whole like pendulum shift in sort of like, you need to be like heroin chic, 2000 skinny, Ozempic and all these things. A lot of pages be like, guys, you're okay. Like the phrase body neutrality I found recently, and I was like, you know what, that's me. I like this phrase. Just being like, you know what, whatever I am, chill, happy. I look great, you look great, the world keeps turning. I think that's such a good phrase. And so I think there's like loads of different like pockets of social media and of the internet that I've myself found really helpful, and that I think loads of people also find really helpful. I don't think necessarily it's like there's one bit you're like channeling into, but I just think that it's so big and it's so broad. It goes to your same point in the beginning, that like social media is so integrated into like complex society, that we have to sort of accept it for what it is, and sort of understand that not everything's going to be perfect, because it's never going to be perfect, because it's just another thing on earth. But there are so many parts of it that are just so like great, I think.
Thank you so much. Honestly, like that response was brilliant. I think the idea of like people being able to find their shared interests and like geek out over it and like feel like they belong somewhere, or that like whatever issue that they're going through, it's like not just them. I know like similarly, like I found so much in the wave of heroin chic and all of that coming back. Like I have found such sort of like little bit of a sanctuary in like certain digital spaces to get away from that and feel like that isn't what my life needs to revolve around. Like it's okay, take a second, like we can be neutral. We don't need to go back to kind of harmful practices. Like it's not not the big picture. And I think that being able to use like the digital world to really get that big picture on issues where you can feel so alone, or like there's only one choice, is really brilliant. And like being able to find a bit of solidarity. Like at the same time, we always need these guardrails and these safeguards to make sure that like those spaces don't sort of tumble down into harmful rabbit holes. 100%. But similarly, like recognizing the fact that if it is properly regulated, and if like the proper design features are there to stop people going down the harmful rabbit holes, but similarly find that community and connection and geek out over their favorite thing, and develop their passions, like that is something that should be like celebrated and amplified, and is like probably under recognized in like the current debates and discourse, maybe because young people's voices aren't being uplifted as significantly as they should be, because like with anything, like in the real world, there is such diversity in experience and lived experience, and your identity can inform how you experience like the real world. Is the same in the digital one. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that. But honestly, thank you so much for that. That was so on point. Okay. The next one is, what do you hope the internet looks like when like the current like Gen Alpha, like year sevens and belows, are grown up? Like considering that obviously like we grew up with the digital world as it was changing, but it was kind of like the evolution of social media. Like I think I was born in the same year as like YouTube. And so we've watched it like grow up, but now like those year sevens and like below are growing up with AI as that's kind of developing. Like what do you hope the internet looks like for them? And like, what do you hope it does for them? And like, what do you hope it doesn't do for them? I know maybe that's a big question, but I think it's important to unpack. Maybe we'll go to Yazz first.
It's definitely a huge question, but I think it's a really good one and something that's very key to talk about, because we want our young people to be able to grow up using social media in a really positive way and not be able to not to experience harms that perhaps you and I might have experienced, or people our age, whilst growing up with social media. I think it's quite important that social media is that space for young people to connect with other young people. Like Kashuf said, it was a way that she used to connect with her younger brother, I think it was, she said. And I think that's really lovely, because had that have not been there, then there may not have been as close a connection between you during those times, and it may have been harder to connect. Yes, you can argue there's things like board games or things offline, but also, like, so what if it was the internet or social media that did connect them? Because that's a brilliant use of a tool that we now have in this current day and age. According to the Girlguiding research, over 50% say that social media makes it easier to find support, especially on things that perhaps young people wouldn't necessarily talk about offline. Obviously, some topics, like if it's misogyny and things like that, but perhaps boys are being misogynistic towards girls on like private accounts. I know, Delnaz, I think you mentioned a bit earlier about men typically, and boys as well, are the ones who kind of make hate comments against women who, and behind like a private profile and perhaps no picture or no pictures of them or anything like that. I think it's important for it to not be that way, but to have the opportunity to talk about issues that you may not talk about in your day-to-day life. For example, you're probably not talking to the people around you about the harms and the benefits of social media unless you work in that industry, unless you are advocating in that industry. But for a majority of people, they're probably not talking about that, and they probably don't realize the harms and also the benefits that social media brings. But I think it's, honestly, we need to make sure that it's a safe and regulated space for young people to use. I don't think we should completely take it away from our young people, because it's part of the current day and age and it's part of the technology we have now. And 40% of young people say that social media does help them advocate for issues that they're passionate about. For example, now, if we didn't have the internet, we wouldn't be filming a podcast. We wouldn't be able to chat about these issues. Obviously, we could have filmed a podcast in person, and that used to be the case before the internet. But to have those conversations whilst we're all in different parts of the country, I think that's really important, because we're then amplifying our opinions and the opinions of those around us, and really making sure that we're advocating and speaking out on issues that are important to us, because we need that space to be able to do that. And social media and the internet has really cultivated that for us. And we need to make sure that legacy kind of continues down to like the Gen Alpha that you were saying about making sure that it's a safe space and regulated for them to see just the benefits, or as much of the benefits as possible.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that idea, like, I love that this conversation has been like so uplifting. I think like the potential for like social media to sort of like close these divides and bring people together is something like you guys have both touched on. The idea that like it brought you Kashif closer to your brother, like it can bring people with like different lived experiences from like different backgrounds like closer together to learn from one another. Like striving for that capacity to like live on and mean that you can connect with different people no matter what your like circumstances or resources are. The fact that we're all here across the different like parts of the country having this conversation now, like the digital world can break down all those barriers if we can just like ensure that the harmful stuff is taken care of. And it's so important to like come back to that. And I also think your point on sort of sometimes people like discounting online interaction is like really interesting, and also like definitely something I've experienced. I think sometimes we like discount like interactions online as like not being legitimate. And as much as obviously like we can talk about maybe like the fact that young people have really high screen time and like that can be worked on and everything else. But at the same time, like interacting with people like you in the digital world is like a very valid form of connecting as long as it's done safely. And the fact that it can be like stigmatized in like the public sphere as like second class interaction, I think is like not so great maybe, because some people that's all they've got. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that people from different communities, especially like I, belong to like the disabled community, and like a lot of people in that space, like the digital world is what they've got. And I think it's really important that we allow them to maintain that connection. And it's the job of the people in charge to make sure that they can have a safe experience in doing so. So thank you so much. The next question is, what does a healthy relationship with the digital world look like? Delnaz, can we go to you?
Yes. So, what does a healthy relationship look like with the digital world? Oh my goodness. I think there's a few things. There can't be just one thing. But if I'm thinking about, the steps I've taken myself, um, one is limiting time. And this is it's difficult to just tell someone spend less time and your problems will be over, when it comes to social media. That's definitely not how it works. But um it's not even just the harmful content from my personal experience anyway, it's the endless scrolling, and sometimes something may not seem harmful, but like we described before, maybe beauty standards, and things like that, if you're just constantly looking at that, even though it's not, images of war, it can still have an impact. So for me personally, I have an app that doesn't necessarily restrict me from it, but it forces me to wait before accessing Instagram. That's the only app I have it on, and because I noticed before I would be on the train or wherever, and my finger would just go to the app. I didn't actually think to myself, "Oh, I want to view something or I want to look at some videos." It's just muscle memory. So with that app, it now would make me wait like about 15 seconds. And before I even got to halfway, I'd be like, "Oh, actually, I didn't even mean to go on the app. I'm just gonna get out of it."
Yeah,
And then
that's
if I
so
really
cool.
want to see something or message someone, yeah, I'll wait the 15 seconds. It's not the end of the world. And that helped me a lot. Talking about things I see help me. Cosma, I know you and I talk about this all the time because we work in this space, but also I think for anybody, it's good to talk about something you've seen that bothers you, or even something good, to kind of destigmatize the whole spending time on social media thing. Because I feel like if a kid comes out, especially to someone who may not be as familiar with the harms and the type of addictive algorithms, and they say, "Oh, I've been spending, this many hours per week on my phone," they can be really looked down upon because, someone might think, "Oh gosh, it's horrible. You need to learn how to regulate yourself." But if we switch the language to, okay, like, let's see how we can maybe change that up. If you think that's the best way to go, just being able to openly talk about it, I think, is an indicator of a healthy relationship. And it takes time, I think, to develop that, especially for us who grew up with social media. We grew up together essentially. Um, and so w- I think as a 10-year-old, I've had, social media for a few years by that point. I didn't really know what was coming next. So it was really hard to discuss how to regulate myself and stay safe online when I didn't know what app was going to come out tomorrow. So I think open conversations are a good starting point.
Thank you so much. I love like your addressable of the idea that like some things we don't know that they're harmful at the beginning, and like some things are the harm comes from the fact that it's like compounding, and we see like things over and over again, and like maintaining that open dialogue is something really key to combating that, because if we can recognize something is maybe starting to like make us feel bad or like make us feel stressed or whatever else it might be, then we can like consciously like uncouple from it, and we can get back that agency. And I really love your this app. I want to know about it afterwards.
For
Because
sure.
I think like creating little nudges for ourselves, like I think it's okay to acknowledge the fact that like some of us do spend a lot of time on our devices. For some people, maybe that's they feel okay with that. For some of us, like we want to like maybe spend a bit more time outside or spend a bit more time on our like school or whatever else it might be. And like instead of shaming young people for like spending that time, like let's shift and just think proactively, like what can we do to like reprogram our brains a little bit and just have that like healthy balanced relationship, because none of these things on their own are like inherently bad. Like maybe we get to a point where we're like, oh god, like I've spent like 3 hours doom scrolling, I just don't want to be doing that again. So then what are like the practical steps we can take? And then I think we're like shifting the blame off of young people and not necessarily back onto anyone, but we're like taking back that control and agency. And I think that the idea of agency and transparency are things so important to young people. Like as a generation, I think we really care about like understanding how things work and why they're happening to us and what that means for different people in society. I think we really care as like a generation. And so like thinking of those different steps we can take, like downloading little like screen time apps, or working on like feasible alternatives of other things we can do when we're bored, whatever else it might be, is really important and cool. And then it's like on our terms and not on anyone else's terms. And I just like that vibe. Okay. As young people who grew up, we've talked a little bit about this, but as young people who grew up with sort of one version of the digital world, like the social media era, what advice do you have to other young people growing up with like these new technologies developing as they do? And like what would you want like a 13-year-old now to be mindful of and aware of when they're in the digital space, to take care of themselves, their friends, or just like something you wish they knew about the online experience? Kashuf, can we go to you?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting one. It's a scary one almost. That like even I don't know, like 10 years ago, the digital world and social media has evolved so much and like exponentially compared to when we were obviously at their age growing up with it. So I feel like one of the big things I'd say is like we've had this chat previously that like social media is just an amplification of what is in the real world, but obviously amplified, it can sound louder, it can sound scarier. So I feel like one of the biggest things, and sort of similar to what Delnaz was saying, that I also have a little blocker on my phone that tells me like every 30 seconds, breathe. Are you actually intentionally going on social media, or are you just doing it for the buzz of scrolling because you have nothing better to do with your like 5 minutes? Is really letting them know that making sure that when you go on social media, what you're seeing is what you want to see, making your time be intentional time you're wanting to spend. So maybe you're going on a specific page, or you're going to speak to a specific group of people you met online, but ensuring and reminding them that like all this sort of like noise that you're hearing is just amplified noise. Like the world is a scary place, but it's not as scary as maybe it sort of seems. So maybe you hear about an issue going on in the news like at the minute, a very important thing to hear about, but then you hear it on your phone, you're scrolling through and going, oh my God, all these people, oh this, that and the other, and this and that, and it just makes you like worse. It makes you fear like living almost. You're like, I don't know what to do. You feel helpless. And so letting them know that everybody has this feeling, but that feeling is just being amplified. It's the corporation, it's the big people at the top who obviously are there wanting you to spend more time on your phone playing and getting more money from like feeding you ads, playing with your emotions and making you scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. And it's like maybe let them know, because again, your point that was so good, that young people want to know what's going on. We want to sort of like delve into the issues and like what's going on, why it's happening, and what the sort of like inner workings of social media is reminding them that we all have a voice as well. Even though we're young and we're still growing up, we have just as much a voice to say that we want a national conversation. We want a chat with these big corporations to say like, you're the ones controlling our algorithm. Because obviously social media has evolved to a point now where the corporation now knows how to work sort of the scrolling and how to keep us on our phones 24/7 365, how to keep us addicted almost. And we need to chat with them and say, this isn't good enough. Like you're feeding like I think 50% of people images, explicit, violent, sexual things that they don't want to see, just for the sake of having the shock factor, and them saying, oh my God, I saw this thing, and then keep scrolling, because our scrolling gives them ads, gives them money, feeds their pockets. So I think it is the time in letting young people know that we have just as much of a voice to say that a conversation is needed, a time and place, and almost now where we need to say that this frankly isn't right, it isn't good enough. Victim blaming us, saying, oh, it's the fault of young people, not good enough. Blaming the government or blaming adults, saying you're not looked after your children, not good enough. It is these corporations themselves that need to sit down and say, we're not doing right by our people. We need to take a stand now, I think.
Thank you so much. Yazz, what are your like final takeaways? What would you tell to like a 13-year-old now? What advice would you have for them like navigating the digital world as it's changing, as it stands now?
Well, I definitely agree with Kashif's points, especially about being intentional with your time on social media and not falling into that kind of doom scrolling loop. But my advice would be to probably kind of have a think about what content you're seeing and whether it's real. Like, as in, is it kind of content that you would believe from the same source in person, or is it not? And having a think about like the sources that you're seeing that information from, and also just being aware that anyone can hide behind a profile on social media. Of course, people can tell lies and stuff in person in the real world, but on social media, it really kind of amplifies that, and people have more opportunity to bully people online because they don't have to put themselves in front of that person. They have more opportunity to post negative comments, things like that. So just kind of taking each piece of content you view, whether it be a YouTube video, a TikTok or Instagram post, whatever it may be, kind of having a second thought about the stuff you're consuming, especially around politics. There's so much going on in the world, and to kind of get your content and the information that you're getting is coming from like a trusted source. And that can be different for different people. And also thinking about how people may, for example, exaggerate things online as well. So, for example, if you're on StudyTop, which is huge, people may be lying about the hours they've studied or the grades they're getting. Again, yes, that can happen in the real world, but again, there's more opportunity for that online, and it's not to compare yourself to those people. For example, I'm doing my A levels right now, and I've definitely seen content about how many hours people are studying a day, and it's not realistic. Okay, yes, you'll get those conversations in person, but it's less likely to happen, and people are more likely to be honest with you in person because they can see you and they see a real face, they experience a real connection. Whereas if you're filming a video just to post online, yes, it can be helpful to some people if it's advice and information that's actually factually and scientifically correct. But when it comes to studying information or politics or something like that, it's not always going to be correct. I'd say to young people, just check your sources, please, before you go around spreading more misinformation, or before you believe something that may not be true and compare yourself to it and put yourself down for that reason. Just have a double check on those sources, and remember, not everything you see online is true.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. Like, we at FlippGen are so passionate about like no tech with a K, and like understanding in digital literacy and like empowering yourselves with the skills to discern what we see online, and really thinking about like, what am I seeing? Why am I seeing it? What does it want me to like feel? And like, is it like legitimate? So that's brilliant advice. Thank you so much. And Delnaz, what is your tip to young people?
Yeah, I would say they need to be aware of two things. If I were speaking to a young person growing up in the digital world right now, I would like to convey that it is mainly the responsibility of social media platforms to keep you safe, both from repeated harmful content and also from addictive algorithms that keep you on there for dangerous amount of hours. But also, like you said, FlippGen's motto, no tech, KNOW, educate yourself on how it works. Because again, like I discussed before, it helped me I think I was, in my late teens maybe when I really started putting limits on my social media. And that's only because I finally went in and understood how the algorithms work, why they're built like that, and kind of the history of how the designs have evolved. And educating yourself about that and why harmful content spreads, why some people might be posting hateful comments, that can be extremely helpful, and it can help you navigate some of that. Not saying that it's the young person's responsibility to know everything and to make sure that the whole digital world is a safe place to be. Again, that lies on the social media platforms, but having some sort of foundational knowledge will be really helpful, especially if you do encounter some harmful content or a hateful comment. It'll allow you to stop and think, what did I read before? Oh, okay, this is probably because of this. And it can really, help you kind of process things in a more healthy way.
Thank you so much. I think that's us off so nicely, like back to our like key ideas of digital literacy. But I think we've also had such a very like conversation about like the power of social media to connect us and uplift us, and like pursue your interests and whatever else that might be, but also the importance of having like effective guardrails so that we can like see through the veil of harm that, can be really overwhelming. And like, especially when it's all you're seeing, and you're seeing it on multiple platforms, and you're seeing it like every time you open your phone, and then you aren't so great at turning off your phone, like it can be so overwhelming. And so like getting back to understanding why and what we're seeing, and like making those informed decisions, and also like empowering ourselves with the balance is so important. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. This has honestly been like such a brilliant conversation, and I don't say that lightly. So thank you so much. And we will see you guys on the next edition of Flip the Script.